Outlook series 2021 continues with a very good friend of mine. He is considered probably one of the most prominent voices when it comes to silver. He is David Morgan of the Morgan Report. David, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy 2021 to everyone.
Absolutely. Happy 2021 to you, David. And like I said, you are the silver guru, but we're not just talking silver and gold prices with you today. We are really going outside the box with you, talking food with David Morgan, cybersecurity with David Morgan, and then, yes, of course, we will touch upon silver and get your outlook. I know everyone's waiting to hear it. But first, why are food and cybersecurity at the top of your list right now? I think I know the answer, but let's hear it.
Well, I listened to some of your interviews on the 2021 perspective. And, the big thing about nature preaching balance is you've got to have a balanced system. And we have an imbalanced system in a lot of ways. But one of the imbalances that's coming to the fore right now is the food production, distribution, and stores. Stores meaning stored food. So we're in a crisis situation that very few are aware of. There's a soybean shortage right now as we speak. There's also a lot of dislocations throughout the animal husbandry sector, meaning the food chain and meat. And that's rather significant. There's been a rather dramatic push toward a vegan type of diet, and that's been pushed. I'm going to remain neutral. I have a daughter that is, so I'm certainly not going to say right or wrong. I think it's an individual choice, but I don't think some government should mandate what it is. So there's a lot in that sector that needs to be looked at. And I was one of the early voices in the wilderness talking about food problems going forward. And here they are right in front of us. China's basically importing almost everything that they can get their hands on. The food bank situation in the United States is critical. I think the main outfit's called Feed America. Don't quote me, you can look it up. And I just watched a video recently for this interview, and it said that there would be about $1 billion shortage money-wise for that program through this year. In other words, the amount of food that's available, that's in their shelves ready to hand out, is very minimal at this point, and they're going to need more and more as time goes on. So I'm not trying to get everyone upset. I'm not trying to be a doomer. I'm just trying to give you some facts that you can dig deeper in. But there's nothing more critical for everybody, left, right, or in between, no matter what nation state you adhere to or dislike. We all have to eat. And one last comment on that, and this is from personal observation, and I'll pick on the Americans. There's a lot of obesity in America, and it's, in my view, I hate to blame. I'm not a victim type mentality by a long shot. Anyone that knows me can verify. But to some degree, it isn't our fault, which means to some degree, there are a lot of people that are overfed and undernourished. I mean, there's something like over 40 countries in the world that will not allow GMOs. In America, not only do they allow GMOs, they allow the fact you don't even have to put GMOs on the label. So there's a lot of, let's say, less than optimized nutrition going in throughout our society. And I find that to be really disheartening in so many ways. So I don't want to dwell on the food factor over and over, but I wanted to voice it because, David thinks a lot more than just about the silver market.
No, I'm so happy you're bringing this up, the GMO issue, David. When will we see a change in this country?
Voting. The best vote that anyone can make is with their pocketbook. If we had true education, real enlightenment, let's say a conscious society, then people would inherently, now I understand a lot of people couldn't afford to do it, but there would be enough people that could do it. And there would be people that can't now that could in the future, meaning they might sacrifice, when their cell phone services or maybe their Netflix thing to eat better. So if we were conscious enough to vote with our pocketbook and only bought non-GMO, believe me, the food producers would get the message. That's the way that we do it.
The food shortage, is this really a repercussion of the pandemic, or was this brewing before?
Both. The health crisis exacerbated the situation, but the Three Gorges Dam in China was hugely instrumental in taking out a lot of food stores and future production. You had a similar thing in through the Mississippi Valley, through the corn and wheat belt of America, where stores were water soaked and you had flooding. You have erratic weather changes that you can look at with my friend David Dubine on Adapt 2030. The Ice Age farmer, Christian, I would shout out to him as well. There's a lot to look at. I'm not an expert, but I'm very aware and I do study these things. So it's would have happened without the health crisis, but the health crisis has made it worse. And the reaction by government's overzealous ability to, let's say, disrupt the food chain has added to the problem, not to the solution.
One thing I've observed in, my little world here is the pandemic has shed, huge light on access to supply. And I feel we've seen a return to basics of people wanting to learn how to garden. Here's a skill that my dad tried to pass on to me for years and I ignored, and all of a sudden I'm taking an interest. I make my own baby food for my kids, and there's a huge shortage for mason jars, the jars which we store the food in. People are buying up mason jars because all of a sudden they're doing their own preserves at home. They're pickling more at home. So I think there is a revolution almost happening here, David.
Oh, I agree. And it's going to become more so. I mean, James Howard Kunstler, World by Hand or something like that. I hope I got the right name, James. But, there's a lot that we are going to get much more simple in our lifestyles. And that's going to be deliberate, but it's also, I think, beneficial. I think there is a price to pay when everything is a microwave mentality. There's something about actually taking the time to look at what you eat, grow it yourself, prepare it properly. There's some balance there that we've gotten so far away from. As you said, we're looking at balance in nature, and this is something that we've gotten away from.
How has this affected, or has it affected how you're investing then?
Well, I said, I'm not a big fan of ADM, Archer Daniel Midland, but it's a way to hedge. So I put that in the report not years ago, but many months ago. I also put out a COVID vaccine study situation. I mean, when these ideas pop in my head, I give them to my paid readership just to, let them know where I'm thinking. Obviously, I do a lot more than just the precious metals, but it's my thinking is that we've got to get back to nature, and it's happening. Whether we are doing it by force or by choice, it's happening, and it will continue. That trend will continue. You're seeing already how many people are leaving New York and looking for rural property. And to a lot of New Yorkers, the suburbs are rural. Relatively speaking, that's true. But even the suburbs are going to have problems in the future. And the other thing I really want to talk about, and I didn't prep you before the pre-interview, but that's the energy cliff. There's energy problems coming as well as food problems. So we've got a lot to look at that we can overcome. It can be achieved. It's just our priorities have to be reset. And if we're only focused on what the financial futures markets looks like in terms of how many dollars a S&P share is worth, we're focusing on the wrong things.
You're also focusing on cybersecurity, top of your list for 2021.
I've been writing about this for quite some time. If you look at any of the true experts, and I'm not one, but I listen to them, and you ask them, and sometimes at the public forum and sometimes privately, that what is their number one concern? And it doesn't matter if you're talking about Google or Twitter or Facebook, and those are just social media platforms, but you can talk to some of the IBMs, some of the, uh, internet security firms, the McAfee's, and all of them. I mean, almost to a man and woman, you will find that their main concern is security. And we have had a huge breach in security with the solar winds problem that's been rather pervasive through the most important sectors of the economy for the United States, which means not only the NSA and the White House, but many branches of the federal government, but also something like 400 out of 500 of the S&P companies. Now, that was how many of these really top level internet interface entities had those contracts. Not all of them were compromised. A very small percentage, we have been told, of those have been compromised. The problem is it was such an elegant hack that the tools that were used as hacking devices were basically taken from this preventative hacking company and now can be used against us. So a lot has been said about this, but it's really not in the mainstream. And you are giving me this platform. I want people to be very aware of it. I see sort of a somewhat dystopian future where food is going to cost multiples of what it does now. And yet the iPhone 27 may be able to turn on by your thought alone. I don't know. I see a rather sci-fi world where we're in this high-tech situation combined with a much more rural and basic situation for housing, food, and the essentials of life.
Wow, it sounds like you've been doing a lot of deep thinking over the holidays, David. So how do we, the world you paint of with speaking about cybersecurity is frightening. So how are you protecting yourselves? What are things that we can do at home?
There's really not a lot you can do. I mean, if you have a good internet service, I mean, the people at our level probably are not going to have much of an issue, but the people at the higher levels I outlined could.
Yeah.
And of course, we all interface. The problem with the internet, good and bad, is that we're all interconnected. Now, of course, you could firewall it, and you can section off, and you can close down, and you can eradicate something, but it's like trying to get rid of an infestation in a building. You know, you might eradicate about 10 of the nests, but that 11th one you missed is still there. So that's probably a fairly good analogy for the problem. And we don't know if it's just espionage or if there is, let's say, more interesting things to come. I would suspect the latter, but I do think it could sit there and do nothing that's that obvious for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, you might have a banking interface, or you might have a large service provider that is unable to allocate their resources to their internet connection. So I am very concerned about it. I don't want to be overly concerned, but I'm concerned.
Do you see any correlation between those concerns and the run up that we've seen in Bitcoin?
Yes, I think that there's a correlation for safety. The problem, first of all, I'm neutral to slightly positive on I'm very positive on any currency system outside of the establishment. So competing currencies, I'm all for. The best way to do an anonymous transaction is still the old school, which means pocket change of precious metals that you can exchange. There's no need for the mining software to be up and running. You don't need an electronic platform in order to make an exchange. So that is as basic as it gets. It's been that way for thousands of years. Moving up from there, there is some problems potentially with cryptocurrency relying on a database and electronic exchange platform of some type. The other part is you need somebody's permission more or less to sell Bitcoin. Usually, in most cases, it can go peer-to-peer. It's always talked about peer-to-peer, but most transactions are not peer-to-peer. Most transactions go through a Coinbase or some type of intermediary, Genesis or whatever, to make the transaction. Because if I want to sell my Bitcoin, if I don't know somebody right now that wants to buy it from me, I've got to go out there in the market and have someone, a middleman person, determine for me what I can yield on it. So I'm not against it. I just like the idea that's been brought up in many of these interviews about Joseph Tainer's, collapse of complex societies. You really want it as much to be as anti-fragile as possible. You want things to be robust. You want them to be able to be hit on many vectors and be able to sustain. I mean, that's the whole idea about, the human immune system. The more it's attacked by different, pathogens and bacteria and viruses and this type of thing and left on its own to overcome these, it will actually protect you and build your immune system. And not that some don't have problems, because some will, but in the greater scope, it fortifies the human condition. So it's the same thing here. I mean, I'm using that as an analogy.
David, let's wrap here, and of course get your thoughts on the metals. Silver and gold just closed off their best year since 2010. A lot of high hopes and investors betting on silver with the Green New Deal, which would see a huge push for silver and silver in solar panels. The goal is to get this moving going and concluded by 2050. How is this year set up for the metals, you think?
Very good. First of all, I think silver confirmed my analysis, and I've been off in time, but not on the large fundamental picture. At least I haven't been proven wrong yet. Silver outperformed all the precious metals this year, which is confirmation that we are in the last phase of the bull market. Usually when you get into the major phases, silver will lead gold and outperform. And we had that happen this year, going from like a 125 gold silver ratio to the current near a little more than 70. So it's outperformed everyone and percentage terms. So that's year one of the new bull market. The next year, this year, 2021, we should see an outperformance of silver again, especially since silver is sort of a good time, bad time metal. If we have an industrial resurgence, especially in the green energy, you've got the solar, as you mentioned, you've got all kinds of bactericide type of properties, even using silver in masks because of the antibacterial properties. You also have the EV market, which no one really talks about, but Samsung has a EV battery that will be superior to the lithium battery right now. And that's something that I always smile about, because if you were driving an EV that was powered by a zinc silver battery, you probably at the end of 10 years could cash your car out for far more than what you bought it for based on the price of silver. But I'm bullish silver, so time would tell. But that's somewhat of a joke. But there's a lot in the 5G realm for silver. The new telephones that will need silver and gold and other precious metals means that there's a rather large demand for people that want to move from the 4G system into the 5G system.
You know, it's interesting because I feel we've spoken so much in the past about, oh, you need silver and solar panels. I think the difference this time is, okay, now we might actually see this happen on an extremely large scale. So how much silver do you think we'll need more than from numbers we're at now? What can you tell us about supply in silver today and where you could see it in 5 years?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. In fact, I've got them written down, but I'm not going to pick up the notebook and hide my face. Not that that might be an improvement, but I did a look recently on solar, and really all the silver that exists right now, if we used it to solar panels with the current technology, would not be sufficient to give us the lifestyle we have. So in other words, if we devoted every ounce of silver to solar production of energy, it would help, but it wouldn't alleviate the problem. So the renewables aren't that renewable. Being an engineer, I think things through a little bit differently because I'm trained to think this way. But solar panels good for 10 or 15 years. A wind turbine, maybe 10, although it's advertised longer. So that's a large, what's called a sunk cost in finance. It's when you put up a McDonald's, your sunk cost is what the real estate and the building cost you. That's sunk. That's what you got to pay. You might put it on margin, you might get a loan to do it, but nonetheless, it's a sunk cost. So now in order to make a profit, you've got to pay off that sunk cost over time and depreciate it, and then sell your product, which is hamburgers coming out the window or whatever. In the solar industry, obviously it's electricity, and the wind, it's obviously electricity, but there's a price to pay. And the only way to understand it properly is to look at how much energy it takes to build that solar panel, to transport that solar panel, to install that solar panel, and then depreciate it over the life of that solar panel and find out how renewable it is. So where's your break even? When do you get all of your costs back?
Right.
And when do you start getting quote unquote free energy? And when does that free energy run out? I'll say one more thing because I've thought about this before the interview. It's as if you had a car with a very large gas tank. If you had to go in and fill up, and you only filled it up once, and it was good for 10 years of driving. Is that a renewable source? No, not really. Eventually, you're going to have to refill up. It's the same thing. Will the sun stop shining? No, that is renewable forever. It's to capture it, that platform, as today's technology. I'm not saying we couldn't see some huge breakthrough in solar, and all of a sudden it costs 1/10 the amount and it's 10 times as efficient. I don't see that, but I won't rule it out. So I want to be clear. But right now, it's not going to save us.
David, how far has the mining industry come in terms of being cleaner? There's so much talk about ESG, but if we look at, the Green New Deal and solar panels, how much damage has to be done to extract that silver to then try and help the planet in another fashion?
Better than we were. The US, anyone working in the jurisdiction of mining laws that are basically US or Canadian based, are quite cognizant of the environmental impact. In fact, you have to do an environmental impact study before you can get a permit. So like in Mexico, you basically have to bring it back to nature times two. I mean, what I've been told, I haven't verified this for quite a few years, but if you go into a situation and you mine, when you leave, the mine is closed down, you basically bring it back to the way it looked before. Same thing in the United States. The problem is that the World Trade Organization gave China a free pass. And most of your rare earth elements, and silver isn't a rare earth element, but it's still the #1 technology metal by far, more than any other REE, believe it or not. Sorry, I had to get that in. That they can do basically anything they want. And that's why they have the huge pollution problem they have in Beijing and all these other factories, because it's more efficient profit-wise to be a dirty miner than it is to be a clean miner. And they've caught, let's call it the Keynesian disease, an unconscious capitalism where everything is at the bottom line profit rather than doing it right, doing it clean, doing it as effectively and efficiently as possible with respect for what we inhabit. So, you know, I'm obviously pro mining. If you can't mine it and you can't eat it or grow it, you've got to mine it. It's critical. Nothing's really more critical for this society than the silver market. It's essential in so many ways. Nonetheless, we've got to be a lot more efficient. And the last thing I'll do of a plug is recycling. We're coming a lot stronger in the recycling because there's so much metal above ground, iron ore, copper, tin, aluminum, the precious metals, that we really have to get on board the most efficient way to get those metals back out because they're already above ground and reuse them. We have to really start thinking like the old Yankee ingenuity, you know, use it up and rebuild it and reuse it. We've got to be a lot more grounded in our move going forward.
I know you hate forecasts, but I would love to end on this note because if we need all this silver, is it safe to say that you feel 2021 could be the year that silver rehits its former highs of, you know, close to $50 an ounce?
I wouldn't rule it out. I just wrote the January issue. I said $40 is my conservative projection for 2021 with a possibility of hitting 50. If we do hit 50, I expect it'll be the third time at that nominal price. $50 a day is worth far less than $50 in 1980 or in 2011. But nonetheless, I expect technically it would probably get some resistance, maybe fall off. And of course, the silver haters would probably get on the mainstream financial press. So they see silver can never get above 50, blah, 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 blah. And then it will fortify itself and move through 50. Once it goes through 50, the nominal price, I think, I wouldn't say the sky's the limit, but depending on the investment appetite, the amount of silver moved into the ETPs last year was larger than any time ever recorded, which means that normally 10% of the silver market's for investment purposes. We had over 50% of the mineable silver used for investment last year. If that spills over again into this year, we will see some significantly increased prices in silver. Furthermore, if you go back to the WEF, which was mostly referred to as Davos in the past, Scott Maynard last year in, I believe, January, stated that silver was his go-to investment for 2020. He's been proven correct. It outperformed all the precious metals, including the PGMs. So silver is still quite a story in my view. And the last chapter has not been written yet, but I think there's a lot to look forward to for precious metals investors, especially in the silver market.
David Morgan, as always, thank you so much. Great thoughts. Thank you for coming on, enlightening us, and making us think. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Daniela.
And happy 2021 to you and to all our viewers. We will have much more for you. So please be sure to stay tuned to Stansberry Research. In the meantime, keep following us on all our social media platforms. Thanks for watching.